golden child brother sabotaged my business. Years later, my success left him and my toxic family in ruins. From as early as I can remember, my family's dynamic revolved around my older brother, Liam. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. If Liam aced a test or scored a goal at soccer practice, it was an event worthy of celebration. My parents would beam with pride, showering him with praise and affection. But if he failed or fell short, there was always a convenient excuse. It was the teacher's fault for not explaining the material properly, or the referee who had made an unfair call. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, dependable one, the child who didn't need constant attention or validation. My accomplishments were acknowledged, but rarely celebrated. If I brought home a stellar report card, my parents would say, "Good job, sweetie," before shifting the conversation back to Liam. If I stumbled or struggled, there were no excuses made for me. Instead, I'd get a lecture about how I needed to work harder or be more focused. For years, I tried to accept my role in the family. I thought that if I worked harder, achieved more, and stayed out of trouble, I might finally earn the same level of admiration my parents had for Liam. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. By the time we were teenagers, the disparity between us was glaring. Liam was outgoing and charming, the kind of person who could light up a room with his charisma. People naturally gravitated toward him, and he thrived on the attention. I, on the other hand, was quieter, more introspective. I had my own group of friends and hobbies, but I never felt the need to be the center of attention. When it came time for college, our paths began to diverge. Liam decided to follow in our parents' footsteps by joining the family business, a modest but steady company they had built over the years. My parents were thrilled, treating his decision like the second coming of their dreams. They started referring to Liam as the future of the family, positioning him as the heir apparent to their legacy. I, on the other hand, had different ambitions. I'd always dreamed of starting something of my own, building a business from the ground up, creating something that was entirely mine. While my parents were supportive in theory, their enthusiasm paled in comparison to how they treated Liam's choices. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" my mom asked when I told her about my plans. "Starting a business is so risky. Why not work with Liam? He could use your help." My dad chimed in, suggesting that I should stick to what's safe and learn the ropes from the family business before attempting anything on my own. But the idea of working under Liam was unbearable. He had spent our entire lives lording his status over me, treating me like an afterthought or, worse, a competitor. I wanted to carve my own path, even if it meant starting from scratch. So, with little more than a shoestring budget and a head full of ideas, I launched my own e-commerce business. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was mine. The early days were tough. I worked around the clock, juggling part-time jobs to fund my startup while spending every spare moment researching, networking, and building my brand. There were setbacks, times when I doubted myself and wondered if I had made a mistake, but slowly, things started to come together. My first big breakthrough came when I identified a niche market that was underserved. I began tailoring my products to meet that demand, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Orders started rolling in, and for the first time, I felt like my dream was within reach. But as my business began to gain traction, I noticed a shift in Liam's attitude. At first, he ignored my success entirely, acting as though my business didn't exist. But as word spread among our extended family and friends, his indifference turned into something darker. He started making snide comments during family gatherings, questioning the sustainability of my business and mocking my long hours. "You're really working yourself to the bone for what? A couple of online sales?" he'd say with a smirk. At first, I brushed it off. I knew Liam thrived on competition and couldn't stand the idea of someone else in the family outshining him. But as my business continued to grow, his resentment became harder to ignore. One evening, during a family dinner, he made a particularly cutting remark. "You know, most startups fail within the first 2 years," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I just hope you've got a backup plan." I clenched my jaw, refusing to take the bait. But inside I was seething. It wasn't enough for Liam to have our parents' unwavering support. He had to tear me down every chance he got. Then came the sabotage. A year into my business, I was on the verge of a major milestone. I had been in talks with a potential investor for months, and we were finally close to sealing the deal. This investment could have been a game changer, giving me the capital I needed to expand my operations and take my business to the next level. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, the deal fell apart. I received an email from the investor informing me that they had decided not to move forward. The message was polite but vague, citing unsettling feedback they had received about my business. At first, I was confused. I couldn't imagine what kind of feedback they were referring to. But after some digging, the truth came out. Liam had contacted the investor behind my back, feeding them lies about my business and questioning my reliability as an entrepreneur. When I confronted him, he didn't even bother denying it. He smirked, shrugging as though his betrayal was no big deal. "I was just being honest," he said. "Better they hear it now than regret it later." His words cut me to the core. This wasn't just sibling rivalry. This was sabotage, pure and simple. Liam couldn't stand the thought of me succeeding on my own, so he had gone out of his way to tear me down. That night, I lay awake, replaying the events over and over in my mind. The anger, the betrayal, the realization that my family would never truly support me, it was overwhelming. But as I stared at the ceiling, something inside me shifted. I realized that I couldn't keep fighting for the approval of people who had no intention of giving it. I couldn't waste my energy on a family that saw my success as a threat instead of something to celebrate. It was time to walk away. The day after confronting Liam, I made a decision that had been years in the making. I was done trying to prove myself to a family that would never see me as anything more than second best. I had spent my entire life hoping for their approval, working harder, achieving more, trying to measure up to a standard that was constantly out of reach. But Liam's sabotage had made one thing painfully clear. No matter how successful I became, they would always find a way to diminish me. So I cut ties. At first, it was subtle. I stopped attending family dinners and declined invitations to gatherings where I knew Liam would be present. I ignored the passive-aggressive texts from my mom asking why I was distancing myself and refused to engage with the guilt-laden calls from my dad about how family is everything. But as the weeks turned into months, I knew I needed to go further. I focused all my energy on rebuilding my business, determined to succeed on my own terms. The loss of the investor had been a setback, but it wasn't the end. I tapped into every resource I had, refining my business model and reaching out to new clients. Slowly but surely, I began to regain the momentum I had lost. What surprised me most during that time was how freeing it felt to let go of the toxic weight my family had placed on me. Without their constant scrutiny and negativity, I could finally focus on what mattered, building the life I wanted, free from their influence. But cutting ties wasn't without its challenges. My parents didn't take my decision lightly, especially my mom. She called me constantly, leaving voicemails filled with thinly veiled guilt trips. "You don't understand how much you're hurting us," she'd say. "This family isn't the same without you." I knew her words weren't entirely genuine. She wasn't upset because she missed me. She was upset because my absence disrupted the carefully constructed illusion of a perfect family. Without me there to play the role of the dutiful, overlooked child, the cracks in their dynamic became harder to ignore. Then there was Liam. At first, he seemed unbothered by my absence, acting as though my decision to step back was irrelevant. But as word of my business's recovery began to spread, his attitude shifted. He started making snide comments to mutual acquaintances, implying that I was too proud to ask for help and claiming that my success was pure luck. I ignored him. For the first time in my life, I realized that Liam's opinion of me didn't matter. He thrived on control and attention, and by refusing to engage with him, I was taking away his power. Years passed and my business flourished. What had once been a small, scrappy startup grew into a thriving operation with a loyal customer base and a steady stream of revenue. I hired a small team, expanded into new markets, and even secured an investment deal that dwarfed the one Liam had sabotaged. With each milestone, I felt a renewed sense of pride, not just in my business, but in myself. I had built something from the ground up, without the support of my family, and that made every achievement even sweeter. Meanwhile, Liam's life took a different turn. The family business, which he had once been so proud to inherit, began to falter under his leadership. Poor decisions and a lack of innovation had taken their toll, and by the time my parents realized the extent of the damage, it was too late. The first I heard of their struggles was through a mutual acquaintance, who casually mentioned that the family business was on the brink of collapse. I was surprised but not shocked. Liam had always been more interested in maintaining the appearance of success than doing the work it required. What had surprised me was the next phone call I received from my dad. It had been years since we'd spoken, and hearing his voice again brought a mix of emotions. At first, he tried to ease into the conversation, asking how I was doing and congratulating me on the success of my business. But it didn't take long for the real reason behind the call to surface. "We were wondering if you'd be interested in investing in the family business," he said, his tone carefully measured. "It could be a great opportunity for all of us to work together again." I almost laughed out loud. After everything they had put me through, the neglect, the favoritism, the outright sabotage, they had the audacity to ask me for help? "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "But I'm not interested." My dad hesitated, clearly caught off guard by my response. He tried again, this time emphasizing how much the business meant to the family and how my investment could bring us closer together. But I stood firm. That call was the first of many. Over the next few weeks, my parents made multiple attempts to get in touch, each time trying a different angle. My mom sent long, emotional emails about how family sticks together in tough times. Liam, surprisingly, even reached out once, though his message was more transactional than heartfelt. "It's just business," he wrote. "You'd be stupid not to take this opportunity." I didn't respond. Their desperation only solidified my decision to keep my distance. For years, they had treated me as an afterthought, dismissing my dreams and undermining my success. Now that they needed me, they expected me to come running back without hesitation. But I had built my life without them, and I wasn't about to sacrifice my hard-earned peace for a family that had never truly supported me. The calls, messages, and pleas from my family didn't stop. My dad's voice, once so commanding, now carried a pleading edge every time he called. My mom's emails grew increasingly emotional, oscillating between guilt trips and outright flattery. "Your brother made mistakes," one email from my mom read. "But family means forgiving each other and coming together when it matters most. You have the chance to save what your father and I built. Don't let resentment cloud your judgment." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. This was the same family that had dismissed my dreams, undermined my success, and sided with Liam at every turn. And now, when the family business was crumbling under his leadership, they wanted me to be their savior? I could have ignored them. I had no obligation to respond, no reason to let them back into my life after all the damage they'd caused. But part of me wanted closure. I wanted them to understand just how deeply they had hurt me and why I wasn't going to save them from the mess they had created. So I agreed to meet. We arranged a dinner at a local restaurant, neutral ground, where I could confront them without the added pressure of being in someone's home. I arrived early, giving myself time to gather my thoughts before they walked in. When my parents and Liam entered the restaurant, the first thing I noticed was how different they looked. My dad, once so confident and self-assured, seemed smaller somehow, his posture stooped and his expression weary. My mom's usual warmth felt forced, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Liam, on the other hand, looked exactly the same, arrogant, composed, and entirely unbothered. We exchanged polite greetings and settled into our seats. For the first few minutes, the conversation was painfully awkward. My mom tried to fill the silence with small talk, asking about my business and complimenting me on how far I'd come. But I could see the tension in her eyes, the unspoken request hovering just beneath the surface. Eventually, my dad cleared his throat and got to the point. "You've done amazing things with your business," he began, his tone carefully measured. "It's clear you've got a good head for strategy and growth. That's exactly what the family business needs right now." I said nothing, letting him continue. "We're facing some challenges," he admitted, glancing at Liam, who remained silent. "But with your expertise and your resources, we could turn things around. This could be an incredible opportunity for all of us to work together and rebuild what we've lost." The table fell silent as they waited for my response. I took a deep breath, keeping my expression neutral. "And what exactly do you expect from me?" I asked. My dad hesitated, as though he hadn't anticipated the question. "An investment," he said finally. "Enough to cover some of the debt and fund a few key projects. It would be a partnership. You'd have a say in the direction of the business." I turned to Liam, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the conversation. "And what about you? What role would you play in this partnership?" Liam smirked, his usual arrogance slipping through. "I'd still be running things day to day," he said. "But you'd have input, of course. We'd value your expertise." The audacity of his words made me laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that drew startled looks from my parents. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice calm but icy. "You want me to bail out the business after Liam ran it into the ground? You want me to invest my money, my resources, and my time into fixing his mistakes? And in return, I get what? The privilege of playing second fiddle to him all over again." My mom's expression faltered, and my dad looked down at the table. Only Liam seemed unfazed, his smirk unwavering. "It's not like that," my mom said quickly. "This is about family, about saving what your father and I built. Don't you want to be part of that?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You mean the same family that sabotaged my business? The same family that treated me like I was invisible unless I could be useful to Liam? Forgive me if I'm not jumping at the chance to sign up for more of that." My dad opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "And let's not forget," I added, my gaze fixed on Liam, "that you're the reason I lost my first investor. Or did you think I wouldn't find out about the lies you told behind my back?" Liam's smirk finally faltered, his confidence cracking under my words. "That was a long time ago," he said, his tone defensive. "Why are you bringing that up now?" "Because it's relevant," I said sharply. "You sabotaged me when I was starting out, and now you expect me to clean up your mess? You're unbelievable." The tension at the table was palpable, the weight of my words hanging in the air. My mom tried to smooth things over, pleading with me to let the past go and focus on the future. But I had heard enough. I stood up, placing my napkin on the table. "I've built my life without you," I said, my voice steady. "I don't owe you anything, not my time, not my money, and certainly not my forgiveness." As I walked away from the table, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time, I had said everything I needed to say, laying bare the pain and betrayal I had carried for years. But as I left the restaurant, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. My family had a way of clinging to their narratives, and I knew they wouldn't let go of the idea of me as their savior so easily. I just hoped they would finally learn that I wasn't someone they could control anymore. Walking away from that dinner was one of the most liberating moments of my life. For years, I had let my family's opinions weigh me down, shaping how I saw myself and my worth. But in that restaurant, I realized I didn't need their approval, their validation, or even their presence in my life. Of course, my family didn't take my rejection well. The calls and messages started almost immediately. My mom left tearful voicemails about how I was destroying the family by refusing to help. My dad sent long emails outlining why my decision was short-sighted and how I was turning my back on everything they had built. Even Liam reached out once, his tone surprisingly subdued. "You don't have to like me," he wrote. "But this is bigger than us. Don't let your pride ruin everything." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on my business. By this point, it had grown beyond anything I could have imagined when I first started. What had once been a scrappy, one-person operation was now a thriving enterprise with a dedicated team and a growing customer base. I had recently signed a major partnership deal that positioned me as a leader in my niche, and the future looked brighter than ever. But even as I poured myself into work, I couldn't ignore the whispers that began to circulate. Through mutual acquaintances and old family friends, I heard bits and pieces about the state of the family business. Liam's mismanagement had left it in shambles, and despite my parents' attempts to step in and save it, things were only getting worse. At first, I felt a twinge of pity. For all their flaws, my parents had poured decades of effort into building that business, and watching it crumble couldn't have been easy. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't my responsibility to fix. They had chosen Liam as their golden child, their heir, and their priority. Now they were dealing with the consequences of that choice. Then the twist came. One afternoon, I received an email from a client I had worked with years ago. They had been one of my first big accounts, and their loyalty had played a huge role in helping me grow my business. The email was brief but intriguing, asking if I had heard about the recent developments involving Liam and the family business. Curious, I called them. What they told me left me speechless. Apparently, Liam had been trying to poach some of my clients. He had reached out to them under the guise of networking, pitching the family business as a better alternative to mine. In one case, he had even offered to undercut my prices, claiming that my business was overextended and on the verge of collapse. It was a desperate move, one that reeked of the same jealousy and sabotage he had shown years ago. But what shocked me most was how far he was willing to go to undermine me. At first, I was angrier than I had been in years. Liam hadn't just tried to sabotage me once. He was doing it again, even after I had made it clear I wanted nothing to do with him or the family business. But as the anger subsided, I realized something else. Liam's actions were a sign of just how far I had come. He wouldn't have gone to such lengths if he didn't see me as a threat, if he didn't know, deep down, that I had surpassed him in every way that mattered. I decided to take action, but not in the way he probably expected. Instead of confronting Liam directly, I reached out to the clients he had contacted. I explained the situation honestly, sharing the history of my relationship with him and the family business. To my surprise, every single client sided with me, expressing disgust at Liam's tactics and reaffirming their loyalty to my business. One client even sent me a copy of the email Liam had sent them, which I forwarded to my lawyer. While I didn't intend to escalate the situation legally, having the evidence on file gave me peace of mind. The final blow came when I received a call from an unexpected source, one of Liam's former employees. They had recently left the family business due to its financial struggles and toxic work environment, and they wanted to warn me about what was happening behind the scenes. According to them, Liam's attempts to poach my clients were part of a larger strategy to save the business, which was on the brink of bankruptcy. Hearing this should have satisfied me, vindicated me even. But instead, I felt a mix of emotions. Yes, Liam had brought this on himself, but watching my family's legacy fall apart still stung. That night, as I sat in my office, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of being overlooked, the sabotage, the endless fight for validation, it had all shaped who I was, but it didn't define me anymore. I realized I didn't need revenge, or even an apology. What I needed was to move on, to finally let go of the resentment and anger that had tied me to my family for so long. I forwarded the former employee's warning to my lawyer, then deleted the email. I had done everything I could to protect myself and my business. The rest was out of my hands. The fallout from the family business's struggles reached its peak when my mother unexpectedly showed up at my office. Her presence startled me. It had been years since we'd spoken face to face, and the wear and tear of her circumstances were written across her face. The confidence and composure she once exuded were gone, replaced by an air of desperation. She explained the dire state of the family business. The debts had mounted to an unsustainable level, and the bank was on the verge of foreclosure. Every attempt they had made to save the company had failed. She painted a bleak picture of my father's devastation and how Liam, once so self-assured, was crumbling under the weight of the collapse. This meeting was clearly a last-ditch effort, a final plea for me to step in and use my resources to salvage what remained of the family legacy. Her words hit me hard. not because of the gravity of their situation, but because of the context they carried. This was the same business that had once been heralded as Liam's inheritance, the centerpiece of his golden child status. My parents had invested everything into him: time, money, trust, while sidelining me, dismissing my ambitions and achievements as secondary or unimportant. Now, when everything was falling apart, they were turning to me, the one they had ignored for years, for salvation. The irony wasn't lost on me. As she laid out her case, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a flicker of pity for her situation. She and my father had spent decades building the business, and seeing it fall apart must have been heartbreaking. But there was also a deep sense of indignation, rooted in the years of neglect and favoritism I had endured. They had chosen their path, prioritized Liam, and now they were reaping the consequences of those choices. As I sat there listening to her, memories flooded back, memories of every slight, every dismissal, and every time I had been made to feel less than. I thought about how Liam had sabotaged my first major investment opportunity, nearly derailing my business before it had even started. I thought about the countless family dinners where my achievements were glossed over while Liam was lavished with praise. Most of all, I thought about the endless hours I had spent building my life from the ground up, without a single word of encouragement or support from them. It became clear to me in that moment that I couldn't help them. It wasn't out of spite or a desire for revenge, but because I had worked too hard to build my success to risk it all on a family that had never truly been there for me. My business was thriving because I had poured my heart and soul into it, not because of any legacy or safety net they had provided. It was mine, and I wasn't willing to jeopardize it to fix their mistakes. After my mother left my office, a wave of emotions washed over me. There was a pang of guilt, a small voice in the back of my mind questioning whether I should have done more to help. But that voice was quickly drowned out by a stronger, clearer one, a voice that reminded me of how far I had come and how much I had endured to get there. In the weeks that followed, the inevitable happened. The family business collapsed. The debts were too great, and the bank foreclosed, taking what was left of the company. Liam moved back in with my parents, his confidence shattered by the failure. My parents, too, were struggling to adapt to their new reality. For the first time, they were forced to confront the consequences of the choices they had made, the blind faith they had placed in Liam, and the cost of sidelining me. I heard about their struggles through mutual acquaintances and the occasional whispered update from old family friends. Part of me wondered if they regretted their actions, if they looked back and saw the ways they had failed me. But I didn't dwell on those thoughts for long. Their journey was their own, and I had no interest in being dragged back into the wreckage. Instead, I focused on the life I was building. My business continued to thrive, growing stronger with each passing year. What had once been a small, scrappy startup was now a respected and successful enterprise, with clients who trusted me and a team who believed in my vision. The bitterness that had once fueled my drive began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace and fulfillment. I realized that my success wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It wasn't about showing my parents or Liam that I was capable of achieving something great. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above the circumstances I had been dealt, that I could create a life that was entirely my own. There were moments of reflection, of course. On quiet evenings, I would think back to the years of struggle and the people I had once called family. I thought about how their choices had shaped me, not just the pain they had caused, but the resilience and determination they had inadvertently sparked. In a way, their neglect had been the catalyst for my success, forcing me to rely on my own strength and resourcefulness. But those reflections were fleeting. My life was no longer defined by their actions or their approval. I had found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that went beyond their influence, and that was the greatest victory of all. As the years went on, the distance between us grew wider. My parents and Liam remained a part of my past, a chapter one had closed. Occasionally, I would hear whispers of how they were doing, but I never felt the urge to reconnect. The life I had built was too precious to risk reopening old wounds. Looking back, I saw the journey for what it was, a testament to resilience, determination, and the power of self-belief. I had built something extraordinary, not to spite my family, but to honor the person I had become. Their rejection had once been my greatest source of pain, but it had also been my greatest teacher. In the end, I realized that true success wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above the chaos, let go of the bitterness, and create a life that was truly mine. And I had done just that.